Hello and welcome to the Being Human podcast. Today I've got a great episode here for you. I'm sharing with you a wonderful conversation with Jennifer Morel, who is a theologian at Franciscan University, not Steubenville. There is another Franciscan University. I'm sure they get them confused all the time. But she is from Louisiana, and she's done a tremendous amount of work in the theology of the person, in understanding the male and the female. So a lot of work with gender and sex. And she wrote a book called Male and Female, He Resurrected Them. So she talks a lot about this idea of embodiment and the unity of the person, which is why she fits so perfectly with everything we talk about when it comes to integration and how to live this flourishing life as integrated bodies and spirits as human persons. She's going to be one of our presenters at the Summit of Integration, which I'm inviting you to join us. It's going to be June 20th to 22nd in Madison, New Jersey. And you can get tickets for either in person, come join us live, or virtual. We're going to have virtual tickets available at CatholicPsych.com/summit. We have an awesome lineup. Jennifer's going to be there. We also have Dr. Peter Kraft. We have Heather and Jake Kim. We also have Father Columba, who's from the CFRs. He's got his own podcast as well. And then we're going to have a special acoustic concert from Matt Marr. So this is something we started doing last year. It started off as a little graduation event for our certification students, and then it just kept building out. So if you remember last year, we had Paul Vitz speaking and Dr. Jerry Crete and Mother Natalia, all favorite guests of mine here on the podcast and beloved by many of you. And then it went so well and we had such amazing feedback from everybody that we decided let's make it bigger. So now it's a 3-day event. It's going to be in New Jersey, right outside of Newark, so it's easy to get to. We've rented some space at Drew University, and we have a hotel block. And so it's going to be a big party, a celebration of integration, and enjoying each other, and these amazing presentations on very deep and very important ideas of how to live this integrated life, how to bring together the fullness of our humanity in the way that God created us. But today we dig into some really deep stuff. We're talking about male and female, but also Jennifer's work in cultural exploration. And she has a crazy story about what happened during COVID. And she had just taken a sabbatical and had a plan to go travel the world. So travel plans to go around the world and interviewing people from all these different cultures right as COVID was settling in. And she ends up getting stranded in one country. So wait till you hear her story about sneaking in and out, or getting in and out at least through borders, and the amazing people that she was able to interview, and the cultural observations that she has about what is real and true and good and beautiful about man and woman in ways that are cross-cultural. So not just being limited by our very Western sort of first world, postmodern influenced mindset on male and female, but really opening up to a bigger picture that comes to us as we look at all of humanity, the way that God created all of us, and what we can really learn from that. There's some really important things for us to learn here. And then we find out that we don't have to go that far, because right in the origins of Cajun and Creole life in Louisiana, which there's a distinction, we talk about that, it's an important one, we find cultural experiences that speak to some of these lessons that we should all be listening to and learning. And so I hope you enjoy this. I hope this blesses you. I hope you'll join us at the summit. If you can't make it in person, at least on the virtual ticket, we will be doing the live streaming and coordinating interactions between our online community that's joining us that day. And you'll have access to those recordings, I'm pretty sure, for the week afterwards. So if you can't make it immediately, you'll be able to at least catch up on some of those recordings. CatholicPsych.com/summit. Till then, enjoy this episode. God bless you. I spent the last 10 years learning how to help people using the best techniques available in psychology integrated with the Catholic faith. Now we've figured out that there's a better way to help people than just slapping a Catholic label on the same secular model of therapy you find anywhere else. The real question is, how will we make this shift to a new model of truly Catholic accompaniment, keeping the psychological sciences in mind while opening up to a more human and more effective approach? This podcast is here to give you the answer. Join me and follow along as I take you behind the scenes of what this new model looks like, using recorded audio from sessions working with my team, with colleagues, and even directly with clients. My name is Dr. Greg Bottaro, and I want to welcome you to the Being Human podcast. All right. So excited to be here with you, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me. It is always a joy to speak with you, Greg.
Yes, I think fondly upon these like sort of touch points over the years and like sort of this developing interest, common narrative of sort of things you're studying, things you're interested in, and what we're doing here at CatholicPsych. And I'm just always so fascinated to find out where you are in the world, what you're doing. Feels like a moving target sometimes.
It feels like that inside as well, but like in a very nice way.
That's good. As a brief recap, so we've talked before about a little bit of your journey from COVID, but maybe let's just do a brief recap there. Tell us about your journeys in and around COVID.
So one of the awesome things about being a professor, if any of y'all are thinking about doing that, is that you often get a sabbatical, right? So they pay you to take a year and do research if you have a good idea, and if administration is in a good mood. So 2019, 2020, I went ahead and I applied as soon as I could for my sabbatical. I was teaching at Notre Dame Seminary at the time, and set up this around the world trip, right? So I was going to do 14 cultures and 12 months, interview people, and understanding gender in the various cultures, what they had in common, what was specific or unique or interesting about each one. And then, go back to my regular teaching job. But it was 2019, 2020, which meant that about halfway through my trip,
Ruh-roh.
People started to say like the word COVID, which you'd have. I remember I was getting on the plane to leave. I had already done the Americas. I had done Asia. I was getting on a plane for Africa, Israel, and Europe. And the two gentlemen in front of me, it was February 2020. They said, "Oh, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Africa." I said, "I'll be back at the end of June." And they laughed and they're like, "No, you won't."
Oh,
Prophetic voices, right? Because I left in February of 2020 and I didn't make it back till about February of 2022.
oof.
So it was an interesting time, right? I watched the news all the way through Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Israel. They started locking things down while I was there with a good colleague and friend, Adam of Echo Community. And then I made it to Paris and they locked us down 36 hours later. So
I didn't realize. I forgot it was that tight of a window. You just got in there.
I just got in there, but like escargot versus falafel.
Not bad.
I made it to the right. If that's where you're going to be stuck down, so only necessary stores were open. So that meant you could still go to the wine store and get yourself a nice Cabernet or whatever it was you preferred to drink, because that was absolutely essential in France.
Yeah, man, that's such a great place to land.
Yeah.
And so then how long were you actually in France?
So I was in France for 3 months. For 2.5 months, nobody could move. And then for the last half of the month, they started relaxing guidelines. And so I was able to, I had done one interview by Zoom. I was able to travel and get the second interview, snuck my way into Italy. By then, I guess am I allowed to say this now? By then my visa had expired.
I think you're probably safe.
How long after you've been illegal are you allowed to?
As long as you have a U.S. passport at this point, that's probably the thing that you should need to be the most
I have the U.S.
concerned about.
passport. I'm in the U.S. right now. So I went to Italy. I spent a month there. It was amazing to do the interviews, and then my alma mater is there at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross. So got to spend some good time also in their library, and then went to Poland, finished up my interviews, and then I have no idea why they let me back into France. They looked at my expired visa and still let me in. So I'm not ratting anybody out. I won't mention names.
Oh, wow. So in your research at that point, when you proposed the research, what were you specifically looking to focus on?
Yeah, so one of the things that's I think is pretty amazing about St. John Paul II's research is that when he does, most of us are familiar, for example, with the theology of the body, catechesis, man and woman. He created them. He doesn't just like look at the scriptural work. He uses the philosophy of phenomenology to kind of like pull out more of what's in there, right? So he wants to see how human experience gives him a deeper read into scripture. And so I've been trying to do that for theology of masculinity and femininity, which he calls for in the theology of the body catechesis. And so I'm not so much a philosopher, but I knew that psychologists have really worked hard on using that phenomenological method to better understand experiences, right? So I read books on the way they had used it to understand death, or people's experiences of being chronically ill, right? Because once you better understand that experience, you can help someone to better live it, right? That's the point. It's really practical.
Yes.
And as a moral theologian, the hope is always that the work that we do is very practical. So if we're trying then to understand what it means to be created male and female in the image and likeness of God, there should be a practical, well, what does that mean for then how I live as a woman, or how you live as a man, or how we interact as men and women who are called to holiness, created male and female, and who will be resurrected at the end of time, embodied as men and women. And so that was kind of the hope for my research, right? Like, let's dive into these cultures. Let's see what they have to say. Let's see if there are unique gifts or perspectives that the various ones have to offer, as well as something common, and then understand how that allows us to live out being a woman or being a man in a better way.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, and so many ways that intersects with what we do at Catholic Psych, and the cultural expression of that too is so fascinating, and how much we get so limited within our own cultural assumptions and bias. And so it really is the exploration of a Catholic anthropology, and especially the work of John Paul II, to find out what that common denominator is that connects and unites us across the board, all humanity, what's intrinsic to every human person, regardless of time or place. And then what are all these beautiful articulations and manifestations of that commonality through the uniqueness of every individual person and the uniqueness of every culture across time and space. So actually, you were talking before we started recording about a line from Gaudium et Spes.
Yes.
Can you repeat that one again?
Exactly. So Gaudium et Spes 41, from the Second Vatican Council, there's a line in there that says, in each culture, there are hidden treasures that tell us about the truth of the human person. And these two belong to the church. And I love that for so many reasons, right? But one in particular, it means that every culture has something to give.
Yes.
Right? And so I can learn from the various cultures. And at the same time, each culture should be proud that they have a gift. And when I did my interviews, that was actually the last question that I finished with, is that I would ask the person, the man or the woman in front of me. I spoke with psychologists. I spoke with folklore experts, sociologists. I spoke in Kenya. I spoke with the most popular young music producer, and his insights on masculinity and mentorship were just beautiful. But when I would ask about challenges, a lot of times people would kind of get stuck in that. And I wanted each interview to end on the note of hope.
Mm,
And so I would say that, like, we believe that every culture has a unique gift to give. Like, what is the gift? What is the treasure that your culture has to give? And it was so beautiful to hear people reflecting on that and what they used even to reflect on that. I'll give you a brief example, if I may. So, when I went to Mexico, I remember thinking on the plane, I was super excited to go to Mexico. It was not my first time. I have a lot of good friends who are from there, and I have a great love for Our Lady of Guadalupe.
mm.
And so I remember on the plane, I was like, wow, I really don't know anything about Mexico except that I love it. They have good tequila, and the food is great.
By the way, as an aside, have you seen this book yet? Guadalupe and the Flower World
No,
Prophecy?
no.
Oh
Yeah,
man, this
okay.
is just a quick aside tangent. You have to get
Okay.
you will devour and love every second of this book.
Okay.
So
So,
we
okay,
can
that
go
is
back to that later if you want,
on
but I
my
had to
list.
throw that in there.
That's on my list. So I remember that last question, like asking people, what is the gift that Mexican culture has to give to the world? And hearing their various answers. There was a whole play on the word conquista. What does it mean to, one of the men said, I understood women as those who are to be conquered. And one of the women who listened to his interview, and he was talking about his own struggle with understanding what it means to be a man. She said, the word conquista is really difficult because of our history as a culture, but also because women feel like they're being conquered.
Mm,
And she said, and yet what every woman is called to conquer is her own identity, right? That she doesn't allow another culture to dictate that to her,
mm.
or she doesn't allow society to dictate that to her, but that she allows herself to discover that, right? So that was beautiful, even to hear the interplay. And then I think the one that struck me the most was probably one of the last ones I did, a philosopher, Rodrigo, who is very, very much of the school of St. John Paul II. He has an institute there. And he said that he believes the gift that they have to give is the gift of the Guadalupana, right? And if you think about Our Lady of Guadalupe, the fact that when Juan Diego saw her and when the indigenous saw the image on the tilma, right? They would see it, they would go back, they would tell other indigenous about it, who would come back, they'd walk, and after they saw it, they would be baptized, and then they would go back but why? Because they were in a depression. They had been conquista, right? They had been conquered. Their
Mm.
old gods had proven to be useless. And so they felt that their culture had nothing left to live for. And yet, when Our Lady of Guadalupe presents herself, she presents herself as mestiza, right? Literally, a woman who is a combination of the old world and the new world. And they saw this, and they saw the signs around her that could be interpreted both in a Christian meaning and in an indigenous meaning to mean that she was the mother of God. And they
This is what
realized,
this book is all about. I didn't even know we were going to talk about this, but this is literally on my desk right now. So
see,
not only that, but this book is about there's a composer who, and it's the author of the book. It's Joseph Julian Gonzalez and his
okay,
wife Monique Gonzalez, and they. So this is such a long story. I'm not going to even try to open it up right now. But essentially, there is a like 4,000-year old history and tradition in the indigenous peoples of prophecies about what's called the flower world. And this is written into their song and their poetry. It's like in cave drawings that go back thousands of
oh my
years.
goodness,
Like all of this art, all of this Aztec and Mayan art, all of this stuff shows like all this stuff with flowers. And there's very specific elements that it's not an accident. It wasn't like all of a sudden, like it wasn't like this supernatural grace that just like changed all the hearts of all these indigenous, and like 10 million people were baptized in the decade following Guadalupe. It's because their entire culture was embedded within
Yeah.
a narrative in which everything that happened to Juan Diego, exactly how it unfolded, was exactly what was in their prophecies for thousands of years. That's what their paradise was going to look like. So when you show up with like all these roses and they're coming out of the tilma, it's literally they have prophecies about entering the world, the flower world, paradise through a tilma of a
Oh wow.
peasant.
See, and this I didn't know. One of one of the things, and the book probably treats of this too, is the roses that came out of the tilma were actually Catalan roses, which do not
Yeah,
grow in
miraculous.
Mexico, which the bishop had been praying to Our Lady specifically for a sign with Catalan roses.
This is where this and nobody knows this. This is the craziest thing. This just came out like in the last 10 years. And
Wow.
it's because all of this work, all of these songs and this poetry that goes back to the Aztecs were basically buried in these like lost manuscripts that go back from like a couple hundred years after Cortez. Like some of this stuff was recorded by the religious to preserve culture, but then it was like lost in manuscript. Like people didn't really have it. So it wasn't until like the 80s that there was new scholarship where they tried to put together some of the fragments of these different records from the Spanish, and it was like from the 1600s, and they finally, now this composer went looking for poetry because he's Mexican, and he starts reading the poetry and he's like, why does this sound like the account of Juan Diego? And that sent him on this whole path where he's like, why? At first he thought that the story of Guadalupe then must have been just made up because it matches exactly this song poetry from like thousands of years ago. So he's like, oh, wait a minute. They just made up this story that all of the indigenous would have already known. So that's why they got everybody to convert. And then they went deeper and deeper and deeper. And they're like, nope, these are two separate things. And they happen to echo each other because it's God. It's crazy. And
That
this is
is
like the hidden gem. Like this is what I'm so inspired by, because also about that quote that I really love is it says these two belong to the church. Now, if you think about that, that's a pretty bold statement, JP2, Vatican II. That's a pretty bold statement when we're talking about like what's it called? Cultural what's it in culture what's the bad word? Cultural assimilation.
yeah.
Or whatever, where we like just go take stuff from other cultures and make it our own. It's like, wait a minute. The church is saying like these gems that are in every other culture belong to the church.
Yeah.
Like that's mine. That belongs to me. And it's like, well, that's challenging. We have to really dig into that, because what does it mean to be the church then? And it really gets us to go outside of what we think about church. But it also it also speaks to the responsibility that we have to go claim what is ours.
Yes.
And like that's what I see you doing. Like you literally went around the world to go claim the treasure that belongs to the church. That's why I was connecting you to this book, because it's like this couple who did it for this one little thing. It's like that's what they're doing. And so like being the body of Christ, yes, of course we're sharing the gospel, but we're also connecting to humanity, not just forcing, not just giving, putting on top of people, but receiving where people are, and then building the bridge that connects the gospel to where every single person in every culture is.
Yes. And I think too, it also becomes a gift to the cultures, right? Because just as people become sad or discouraged, which is what was happening, right, to the indigenous at that point in Mexico, cultures as a whole can become sad and discouraged. And I think reminding cultures that you have something to give gives them hope to be that gift,
Yes.
right? It gives them hope to be a gift.
It's so beautiful, and it's like it's what you have to give, and it's also like it becomes fully alive. Like the thing that is in your culture is
Yes.
only fully activated and actualized or comes fully alive when it's actually integrated into the narrative of the church. the fullness of God present in the community of
Mhm.
humanity through the body of Christ.
When it's permeated by that. Yes, when it's permeated by the Holy Spirit.
So we're taking what belongs to us, but we're also giving what belongs to them, which is the fullness of who they actually are as human and in the culture.
Yes, that it's that sanctification of cultures that is part of what we're called to participate in. And I think this is a call for many of us as Catholics to step out. I know for a while, and I've been very occupied with my little ones recently, so this may no longer be the case, but I know for a while there were discussions about whether it's better to create small Catholic communities in which we don't step out of, and communion I think is very important, and community is very important, like that support, and living the faith is. But I think there's also this constant call to go out, right? Because if we don't go out, we cannot discover these gifts. And if we can't discover these gifts, we cannot give them back to people either,
Right.
right? So we're falling short of the gospel if we're not looking first also into our own cultures. I did research on my own culture and was surprised, right? And
How
that's so
so? What do you mean?
that's been renewal also for me. So my family comes from the south of Louisiana, and one of the beautiful things that I think people are familiar with the word Cajun now was very much popularized with Longfellow's poem, and there was a revival in the 60s and 70s. But I think I had never understood before how important the structure of my culture was. So I think there's a narrative, right, that the United States is a patriarchal culture and that men have dominated this, and that women either need to seek emancipation or empowerment, or they need to be quiet and to submit. And yet, doing research, one of the things that I learned is that there are various actually matriarchal cultures within the United States. So we've been speaking about the indigenous, there are matriarchal tribes. Um, but the Cajun culture in southern Louisiana, which is a combination of French who immigrated here, and other cultures who made this place their home, the Cajun culture is a matriarchy. And what that means is not that it's a patriarchy flipped, right? So instead of men having the primary political or social roles, women have political and social roles. But what it means is just as patriarchy deals with the values of the father, a matriarchy deals with the values of mother. So, what are the values of a mother? One of the things that is the values of a mother um, is the idea of gift. And so economies in a matriarchy are based more on gift than they are on cost benefit analysis. And so
Mm,
Cajun cultures have a long history and tradition of what's called the coup de main or the boucherie. So when I needed help building a house, all of my neighbors came over and they donated their time, they donated their energy, they donated their supplies. Or when I had a pig to kill, I called all of my neighbors and they came over and they helped me kill the pig and they helped me clean it and they helped me divide it into parts to make different things. And everybody took something home. And
mm,
nobody gave me money and I gave nobody money. Right. But like there was this gift and this sharing that was part of the culture
mm,
that remained within it. In matriarchal cultures, staying close to the family is extremely important. And I can tell you, one of the first things you do when you meet another Cajun is a woman in my case. People will ask me, "What's your last name? What's your maiden name?" And I'll tell them my maiden name is Miller. And they're like, "Oh, you must be one of the Eunice Millers." And I will say, "Yes, I am." Right? Because Jacob Mueller came over in the late 18th century from Alsace-Lorraine in France. He got married. He had 11 children. His wife died. He got married again. He had 11 more. 22 children, and all of the Millers, who are Cajuns, are descended from Jacob Mueller, who lived in the Eunice area. And in fact, I think you have a colleague, Amy Grace Miller, who I ran into at one point, who is also a Eunice Miller, descended from Jacob.
Oh, that is so rich. Yeah, she's been on the podcast here too.
Exactly. So because we've lived together so long, like it gives people an immediate connection. And speaking with a woman who will consider herself Louisiana French, but not Cajun, she said one of the gifts of Cajun culture is that nobody ever makes a decision. She didn't use this word, but we could say quote unquote individual or autonomous. Because nobody ever makes a decision without first considering how it will affect the entire group, right? Not just like how does this affect my family? How does this affect my culture? How does this affect my group? Because between 200 and 400 years, all of the Cajuns have lived together, right?
Yeah, I'm curious if you said kind of like as you're approached as a woman, but as in terms of some of these gender things, and I know that's a lot
Women,
of what you've gotten
yeah.
into. How does that last point affect like one? Well, I guess let me pre-frame this a bit.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is a huge problem is this really separated dichotomous sort of like men are the ones who make the decisions and they're the leaders of the family, and coming from this whole like Western distortion of what the head means versus where the heart is, and that one is prioritized over the other. um how does that play out in your family history culture from Louisiana?
So, three things immediately come to mind. First of all, Cajun families have the history of like Sunday dinners or usually Sunday dinner or Sunday lunch, right? So the entire extended family will get together for those. We usually what happens though is when grandma dies out, those stop, and then
Mm,
families get together around another focal point. But even that shows like the importance of like the matriarchy. So it was interesting because I did marry a Frenchman. I lived 3 doors down from him. And we went over to my mother-in-law's every Sunday night for dinner. And I was like, it's just like I married a Cajun, right? Like there was that same, very much taking from the French. So like those family get-togethers are really essential. And my grandmothers on both sides have passed away. And so that we're still in that process of like working, but we're working towards it. Like, how do we then reconstitute the family?
yeah.
The second way this plays out is the way in which men live out their paternity. So in Cajun families, it's very much expected that the father is extremely involved in the raising of his children.
Mm,
There's not this idea that like, well, I went out and I worked for my bread and my butter, so like I come home and like I'm done. There's this the father, Barry Jean Ancelet, who's the founder of Cajun folklore studies, describes it this way. He says the father is kind of like the taskmaster in the sense that um, his job is to keep everybody on the job so that it gets done. Because from the time that they're little, Cajun children are expected to be a contributing member of the family,
mm,
right? Which gives them dignity, right? You're not
mm.
there just to be taken care of, but you have something to give to the family too. And so part of what the father does is he keeps the children on task so that they finish on time. Why? So that the family can celebrate together. Right?
Mm.
So the family can enjoy the time together. And so he says Cajun fathers in the way that he portrays them, he said like they help the family to live out the joie de vivre by being involved, right? Kind of like that apprenticeship model that really gets lost in the Industrial Revolution when the father is taken out of the home and away from his family. So I think even now seeing my father and my grandfather interacting with my children, that is very much the case,
Oh
right? They
yeah.
want this is your job, whether your job is eating lunch, whether your job is putting up your plate, whether your job is, so I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Whether my job is your job is to put up the toys, I'm going to help you keep on task, because then when you do, the family gets to celebrate together, the family gets to be together, the family gets to
But
enjoy.
even in that, it's like so heart led. It's like I'm just that
Yes.
happens under the umbrella of the matriarch who's like sort of holding the space open, like with that real
Because the
leadership.
values permeate not just the women, but the men. I mean, think about it.
Mm,
If the values of a patriarchy are are within the society as a whole, that means they're not just permeating the way men think about things, they also permeate the way women think about things, which is why sometimes you have models of feminism that like just want to subvert it by let's put women in all of these roles.
Right. And
Let's
it's still so masculinized.
and it's still so masculinized. Whereas in a matriarchy, the men become permeated by those values of gift and giving and family being the center of everything that we do. Right. And so you would ask specifically about decision making. And I think I discovered these things in my interviews because they were so much a part of the water in which I moved. I had never thought about the fact that they were different.
Hmm.
And one of the women that I spoke with, she's also a folklorist. Um, she also she plays the accordion. She's the accordion player and the lead singer in an all female Cajun band. She called it the spoil your man philosophy.
Okay.
And so from the time that I was young, I remember when my father would get home from work, my mom was usually like doing things in the kitchen, on the phone with her friends, da, da, da. And the moment my dad walked in the door, she would say to whoever she was on the phone with, she'd be like, "Oh, my husband's home. I gotta go." And so she'd put the phone down. She would like have him sit down at the table. She'd bring him something to drink. She'd ask him about his day. Like she would fix his plate. Fixing your man's plate is a really important thing in Cajun culture.
I can just hear all the phones turning off the podcast app right now from all the modern feminists who happen to be somehow listening to the Being Human podcast with disgust.
This whole like, and I remember the first time like I was in college, I was in Rome at that time, and a gentleman friend came to visit, and he was just a friend, right? He comes to visit me. It's like morning, and my mom's like, "Jennifer, aren't you gonna fix him a plate?" And I it was funny because I literally thought like, "Oh, she's enculturating me." Like like this is what I'm supposed to do as an adult woman, is fix a man's plate. But the reason that the woman gets off the phone and gets him something to drink and asks about his day to attend to his emotional needs, because men have them too. And it's important
Surprise.
to acknowledge we can't say men need to cry more and not ask them about their emotional needs, right? And fixes his plate is because when it's time for decisions to be made, there's a voice, right? And I can still see my dad sitting, my mom would be like, "Honey, we need to talk about something." And he'd sit down on the sofa and she'd sit on his lap. I think if I had ever tried that in high school, I would, like he'd sit on his lap and she'd be like, "Honey, like this and this and this, I need this and this and this from you." And I don't think that ever, maybe once in memory, that ever happened, that my mom did not then, that decision was then not made.
It's such a beautiful image of real complementarity and what the real Catholic heart and mind vision of sort of head and heart and the fullness of the collaboration that Benedict speaks about between man and woman, that brings us back to the garden, that heals the original wound. And it's so sad to see, and really frustrating in clinical work to see how wrong so many American Catholics are on this point. And that when you talk about the gems in other cultures that belong to the church, it's like these are the kinds of things that need to be unearthed, polished off, held up high for all to see and to learn from, to get us out of this very ignorant, and I love being American. Like, I'm not saying anything like there's something wrong with being American and, white male American, whatever. I love my life. But just looking around at our culture, it's like we're missing a whole lot. And I think if we can get out of our own pride, our cultural pride, we have a lot to learn from other cultures.
And I think probably one of the amazing things about American culture too, is that because we are primarily like, not so we have indigenous, but because we're primarily an immigrant culture, because there are so many cultures that immigrated here, you don't have to travel the world to find these cultural gems, right? Like this semester, I'm teaching a course here on gender, and I had all of my students do the same thing. I had them pick a particular culture and go into that culture to learn from it. One of the students went into the homeschooling culture. She wanted to know, like, how is it different when a father homeschools and when a mother homeschools,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
We have a huge Vietnamese population here in southern Louisiana that sometimes gets appreciated more for its food than for anything else. But one of my students went out of his way. He wanted to do specific, like, how has their understanding of gender changed? Or we could ask the opposite, like, how does their understanding of gender then change southern Louisiana culture,
Hmm.
right? Like, most of us probably have neighbors who come from other cultures, whether that's because they're Italian, whether that's because they're Vietnamese, whether that's because they're Polish, right? And so we already have some kind of familiarity with it. And we have, because we already have relationships with them, the possibility to go deeper and to learn from their cultures and then to ask them what they see in ours.
Hmm.
Right? Like, I was missing so much from my own culture because I hadn't perceived it. I needed somebody else to help me look at it, right? So what are then the gems in our own culture that we have yet to see or to learn from?
Oh gosh, that's so fascinating. That's really so interesting. There's so much there to dig into. It's interesting too. I'm thinking about my own family history. So the Acadiana culture, or the, that Cajun culture, that I forget the history on this, but did the French Canadians come down to Louisiana?
Yes, so we to be correct, so I'll be correct. We would distinguish between Cajuns and Creoles. So,
Okay.
the Cajuns technically are those who left France in the 1500s during the middle of what were called the Wars of Religion, which were basically the birth pangs of the nation state, right? The kings and the dukes were fighting it out politically and using religion often as an excuse. And so they left France and they moved, you're right, to Nova Scotia, and they lived there for 200 years until what we call the French and Indian Wars in the United States were lost. And then they were forcibly immigrated. This is called the Grand Dérangement. They literally put the families on boats. Sometimes they put the women and children on boats, and they told the men, you can join them or not. Right. So
Hmm.
they were forced to leave. And actually, not very many of them, but some of them made their way down to Louisiana. Some of them were sold into slavery. Some went to New England. Some of them went back to France. But the ones who went to Louisiana sent out an all call, and that everyone who had been in that original community, they said, we found our new homeland. And then French people who had not yet immigrated heard the call, and they came and they lived in Louisiana. And those are considered Creoles, those who immigrated straight from France and did not pass through Canada.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
so,
Yeah.
and I have to say that otherwise, some of the people that I interviewed who called me on this point will call me again, right? Like, let's go.
Oh no, it's so good because there's so many distinctions and so many nuances. And I mean, if you're fleeing persecution versus, answering an open invitation for like what looks to be like a new opportunity, those are radically different reasons for being in a place and out of your old place.
Yeah, but you were talking about your own family history, Greg.
Yes, I have half my mom's family comes from, actually she grew up in northern Maine, but was from that French Canadian
Oh,
background, was actually born in Canada across the border. And I don't know too much of the actual family history, but just thinking through culturally, just some of the nuances there. And then my other side of my family is from Italy, and so just thinking through, I was trying to think about French culture itself versus Italian culture itself, and how they sort of interpret the male female dynamics and matriarchy and patriarchy. But it does seem like there's a lot more. Maybe there's some of it that gets conflictual, and there's ways where one learns how to navigate the differences with the other. But it seems to be the case that in a lot more of the traditional cultures, um, it's more of like on an equal playing field.
yeah, and the indigenous in the United States, when I did the interviews with them, the Native Americans said before their colonization by the United States of America, men and women had equal roles. The roles were different, but they were considered of equal dignity. So much so, in fact, that one of the things that begins the feminist movement in the United States is that a woman who's beaten by her husband or whose children are abused by her husband has no recourse to the law. And if
Mm.
she leaves to escape that, she has no rights to her children, which technically she had no rights to anyway. Whereas a Native American woman, if her husband abused her, when he came home to the teepee, all of his clothes were outside because the teepee, everything in it, and the children belonged to her.
Wow.
He had his horse and his clothes. And this was her way of saying, like, you are no longer a man, or you're not comporting yourself as a man. You need to go back to your mother's teepee. which
Oh.
which allows, right, for those relationships to like, it's no longer that you hold all of the cards, so I hope that you're a benevolent monarch, right? Like, the things that I have to say and the decisions that I make are also important within our family. And then, of course, the Native Americans as a whole, family wasn't just an individual relationship, it was a family relationship, right? So as it, in many cultures, as is the case in many cultures today, the family or the tribe as a whole felt responsible for that relationship and thus worked to make sure that it was successful.
Mm. That is a beautiful gem that we need to reclaim. We need to position within our understanding of a church, as a church, of the dynamics between man and woman and family and relationships and community. What a beautiful direction to be able to look towards.
Yes. We have much to learn from, many gems to collect.
Amen. Well, I'm really excited for you coming to the Summit of Integration. I know we're still putting together the precise details of the presentation itself,
Mhm.
but being a part of this and the people we're bringing together and the spirit of openness to the Holy Spirit and also what God is doing in our culture and our world right now, we need a very clear beacon of light and hope for what it means to be human and how to live in this world in a flourishing manner. And I'm really grateful to you for providing a part of that light and for being a part of this.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share, right? Like, it's no fun to collect gems and not to be able to share them with others. So thank you. So thank you for that. Thank you for this.
Amen. Yeah, one of my daughters probably would think differently about it. She collects all the gems she can and sticks them in a treasure box, puts them under the bed so nobody can come grab them. But do you have anything that you're working on currently? Anything recently published, or anything you can direct our audience to go find more about you right now?
Uh, well, one that's being one that was written with a group of Mexican feminists, so I don't know how accessible that would be at this point in time. But we wrote specifically on the fact that, like, structures of justice need to um, work in such a way that they take that people with special needs, those with disabilities, those who are dependent upon others, are no longer the exception,
Hmm.
but rather are fully integrated into society, both medically and also educationally. So, as you know, I have a daughter with special needs,
Hmm.
and Alistair McIntyre wrote this book. You might be very familiar with it, called "Dependent Rational Animals,"
Hmm.
in which he argues the idea that we're all called to become like autonomous individual adults who make their own choices, um, and who are equally free from one another, completely disregards that for the majority of our lives, we're dependent upon others, right? We're dependent upon them when we're children. We're dependent upon them when we're older. We are dependent upon them when we're sick. And even you and I had the discussion we had beforehand. We were talking about the importance of touch as embodied persons, right? Like, we're dependent upon others for, like,
Hmm.
healthy, affectionate touch that helps us to grow as human beings. And so, kind of exploring that with this group of women together, like, what does it mean if we look at society not as composed of independent rational animals, but as composed of dependent persons,
Hmm.
people who are created to be in relationship? So that, again, that's recent, but I don't know how accessible that might
Is
be.
that going to be that's published in Mexico? Is that going to be in Spanish?
No, it's going to be published in English.
Okay.
I know that they're going for a very academic publisher at this point in time. If I have more details, I'll go ask and I'll let you know. But it was fun because I was the only native English speaker in my group, so I spoke in English, and they listened, and they spoke in Spanish, and I listened, and we wrote together. It was
Wow.
amazing.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see that. We'll definitely link whatever you have in the show notes here for the episode. We can always come back later and add it in. How about your book, Man and Woman, He Resurrected Them?
Yes. So that actually we could have a wonderful conversation about right now, or later. So as you know, it was published, but it's become more difficult to have access to. So the publisher has told me that's out. You can find it right now on Kindle. It is accessible to people.
That's how I got it when I couldn't get it physically. So
no, so but so those of y'all who have the opportunity, please, and I really want to thank actually the designer for the cover. Anybody who's familiar with the Theology of the Body Catechesis will notice that one of the things that they tried to do was use a similar style. So there's an icon of the resurrection in which Christ, as he is rising, like literally pulls Adam and Eve out of the tombs up with him. And so they went ahead and they used that icon and changed it so that the hands of Christ resemble the hands of God giving life also in that beautiful image that we have on the Sistine Chapel, in which God gives life to Adam.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's such a good read. I wish it was more accessible. I'm gonna keep pushing for. We figure that out. We get that out there. Good. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I really can't wait for the summit. I can't wait to see you in person, and really can't wait for you to share more of your gems with the rest of our audience here.
Thank you.
So thank you everybody else for listening. I hope this has been a blessing to you. And until the next time, we're praying for you. God bless.
God bless.
Thanks for listening to the Being Human podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to help us spread the word and hear more, please head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and subscribe, as it really helps us to get our content out to more people. Be sure to listen next time as I take you deeper into what it means to be human. If you want more free content and information about what we do at the Catholic Psych Institute, head on over to CatholicPsych.com. God bless you.